Good evening and welcome to If America Fails, The Coming Tyranny, a production of TruthWorks Network. I'm Janice Graham and I'm your host this evening. And joining us is Dr. Raymond A. Winbush of Morgan State University. And we will be talking with him about tonight's very important nuance that comes out of Margaret Atwood's book, The Handmaid's Tale, and the Hulu production, America Under Siege, White Supremacy. And we do thank you so very much for joining us. We're here each Thursday evening in this 11-week discussion forum of the nuances, the looking glass, the handmaid's tale. Tonight, our theme is what is white supremacy? What is white supremacy? Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, the renowned psychiatrist and scholar of racism and the global system of white supremacy, defined it in her scholastic work as a global system of defensive, political, and terrorist strategies perpetuated and supported by people who classify themselves as white and believe that they must abate and prevent white annihilation. We're going to be talking with Dr. Winbush about that concept and its reflection in what we see in this dystopian tale. Um, White supremacy is the belief that white people, or those who categorize themselves as white, constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society to the exclusion or detriment of other racial and ethnic groups, in particular, Black people, brown people, indigenous people, Muslims, and Jewish people. But we can discuss and flush out what all of that means. And we hope that you will stay with us tonight as we analyze and review this dystopian tale as a looking glass. One of the things that Michelle Odom, who was the senior producer and is responsible for so much of this wonderful discussion series, and I talked about when we talked about it because we were fans. I read the book in 1985, the year that it was published. Almost, and I have to say, as a fan, 2 weeks after it hit the stands, I was sitting in the Boston Gardens uh, reading this book. And of course, when Hulu began its production of the TV series, I was popcorn ready, front seat, and have been following it. As a matter of fact, the Handmaid's Tale Hulu production is now in production for the fifth season, and we are all in and ready for it. But what I want to share with you before we bring in our guest, Dr. Winbush, is the notion that Michelle Odom and I discussed frequently about doing this discussion forum. And that is that there are so many nuances of white supremacy, so many events which mirror white terrorism against um, brown and black and indigenous people in this country, that we were afraid that most fans of the TV series would miss them. And so, what I would like to present before we talk with Dr. Winbush is a clip that I put together to help us take a real good look at where we might find those sequences. The other is that Black people, specifically, because most of you do know that I am the host of 34-year-old broadcast, radio broadcast, which is targeted to Black truth and providing sanctuary to deep dive and perspectives of Black people in America, that we did not want it to get lost in a white feminist tale simply because the key character is a white woman. And we're going to be visiting that during this episode. America, democracy, under siege, white supremacy. Hope you'll enjoy it.
Looking and looking and looking beyond the issue of economics. And I heard this gentleman say that racism had to do with people who classify themselves as white maintaining control and domination over people who were classified as non-white. And Mr. Fuller maintains that if you don't understand that, every single other thing that you know will only confuse you. That if you don't understand racism in that context, then every other thing that you understand will only confuse you. After hearing him say that racism is about people who classify themselves as white, maintaining control and domination over people who they classify as non-white. That's all the black, brown, red, and yellow people.
The Lord is great, and he is merciful. The sinners and the whores are blessed with his grace. So
you have $200 for cabs on there, just to get you started. $470 in cash. Medical insurance card.
Boy downstairs is maybe 20 years old. And he can tell me to do anything. He can break my jaw, and no one would say boo. Thanks.
That's beautiful.
and Commander Lawrence, well, is that real?
Seriously? What the actual...
And thank you for joining us tonight. If you're just joining us, and if you have questions or comments, please post them in our chat room, both on Facebook as well as our YouTube channel. There is little new in the ideas that underpin white nationalism, white supremacy, the alt right, and fascism. One of the reasons that I thought it was helpful to us to take a look at those scenes from the Hulu production is to take the time to look for the nuances, to look for the crooks and crannies that exist in both the book and the Hulu production that speaks directly to a history of white supremacy in this country and globally. Don't forget that this forum was born out of the idea that Michelle Odom and I had in looking at The Handmaid's Tale through Black eyes. And in this insight episode, we're seeking input into the impact of white supremacy in the development and engineering of fascism and authoritarianism seeping into American society, growing and exponentially exploding and eroding an already fragile democracy for targeted populations. Tonight, our guest is Dr. Raymond Winbush. If you do not know him, he is a research professor, a psychologist, an author, and the director of the Institute for Urban Research. I've been calling it the National Institute for Urban Research because it is one of a kind in this nation. And we'll talk with him more about what the research center does. As a scholar and activist, he's known for his system thinking approaches to understanding the impact of racism, white supremacy on the global African community. His writings, consultation, and research have been instrumental to this nation in understanding developmental stages in Black males, public policy, and their connection to compensatory justice relationships between Black males and females. And that's called the family. He has served as a faculty member and administrator at a number of universities, including Oakwood University, Alabama A&M University, Vanderbilt University, and Fisk University. Over the last 40 years, Dr. Winbush established numerous projects to raise an awareness of Americans' race relations and their impact upon the lives of Black people. He serves as a consultant to many communities, grassroots, and non-governmental organizations in matters of public policy relating to Black boys and men, mentoring and educational programs, reparations, and issues of race relations in policy development. He is the author, and you might want to write some of these down. He's the author of The Warrior Method, a program for rearing healthy Black boys, Should America Pay? Slavery and the Raging Debate on Reparations, which were published in 2001 and 2003, respectively. He is also the author of Belinda's Petition, a concise history of reparations for the transatlantic slave trade. And it is by many readers and by scholars seen as a sequel from Should America Play Slavery and the Raging Debate on Reparations. Um, his latest book, The Osiris Papers, Reflections on the Life and Writings of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, is intended to be the first of many treatises written to examine the life, theories, and contributions of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, who I reference in opening the show and whose voice you heard in the segment that we just provided. He's a proud father, grandfather, and has served as a mentor to thousands of students across the country. And we are so very pleased to have my friend, and I have been honored to know him for many years, Dr. Raymond Winbush. Hey, Dr. Ray.
What's up, Janice? How you doing?
I'm
Good to
good.
see you.
Thank you for so much for, it was not surprising to me that this was a book and a production for which you would be interested. Now, I'm going to tell a little secret. I
Okay.
know that you are an avid movie and film fan, that you are in the first row before they even take the film out of the box. So this did not surprise me that The Handmaid's Tale would draw your attention. And I am so glad because um, so many people, especially Black scholars, are looking at this as a tale about white women.
Yeah.
And it's seated in the issues facing white women. And so we can talk about that. But um, one of the reasons that I was so happy that you were going to be with this segment on white supremacy is because not only were you a student of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, you were also her friend, and she was your mentor in your career in developing principles and understanding for people in the mental health field, people who are in the emotional health field. And I think your resume certainly is perfect to talk about the issues that are important about this tale as it relates to white supremacy. So, first, talk to us about what white supremacy is and what it is not, and how you see it in this story.
Well, Janice, thank you for having me. The first thing I always say about white supremacy is that we have to locate people classified as white. And most of our location of people classified as white is kind of distorted by the system itself. It's kind of a paradox. So the first thing I always say about white people is that they are a minority. And people will raise their eyebrows depending on the audience, of course. But but if you look at the world, there's only about 8 out of 100 people are classified as white. White people are a minority. And I have had arguments with white people and ironically Black folk who will say, well, you don't know that. And I said, look it up. Look it up in the Wikipedia. Don't believe me. So as a minority, which white people again are, comprising only about 8% of the world's population, half of them being men, half of them being women, white males only comprise about 4% of the world's population. As a psychologist, I know that people who feel that they are under siege create ways of making themselves feel that they are dominant. It's just the nature of human beings and actually the animal world. So as you read the definition that Francis gave at the beginning, it's a racism is when a minority group on earth, people classified as white, see the world as being threatening to them, and specifically by people of color, black, brown, red, and yellow, as Francis says. And those are the majority people on earth. I mean, people classified as white are only left in Europe, which has gotten a lot of attention over the past week. Uh, the edges of Australia, when I was there, white people only live on the edge, and the Aboriginal people live inside. Uh, Parts of South America, virtually none of the Caribbean, and in this country, the United States, soon to be Gilead, and we'll get into that a little more. The state that I live in, Maryland, is 51% people of color. States like California, uh, Florida, and Texas are already seeing white people as a minority. So there aren't that many white people on earth. But what Frances says and her mentor, Neely Fuller, is that they have created a system of self preservation because they are terrified of genetic annihilation. And that system that they created is racism, white supremacy.
Okay, when we talk about white supremacy, I think a lot of people um, cannot see it when it's because there's so many nuances. Nuances is my word for the night, I suppose.
Correct.
But there's so many nuances to it. Let's try to take the definition a little bit further. What we see in The Handmaid's Tale. We see female mutilization. We see involuntary uh, involuntary sterilization. We see reclassification of roles that people play within a caste system, a class system that is governed by law. We see one of the things that's so outstanding to me, Dr. Winbush, is the whole idea that the top neonatal specialists in the entire world had been made a Martha. I
Right.
mean, that has to just simply blow your mind. We see it in the Marthas, we see it in the handmaids, we see it. One of the things that I've always said about this story, especially the Hulu production, is that they have kind of like dusted the parts where, like the colonies. The colonies, to me, when I look at those scenes, I'm looking at a plantation of chattel slavery. When I think about the absence of Black people, I try to find like one of the scenes in the segment we just played is you see this dark skinned man coming through the train station. The first time I saw that in the Hulu production, I was saying, well, where the hell did he come from? And it dawned on me that he was a foreigner, a foreign visitor. He wasn't an American. So he had not been taken under the Civil War. Um, so you see those things, lynching at the wall. And what Atwood had as a writing rule was nothing she would describe as punishment or terrorism had not already occurred in human history. So let's talk about those things. Sterilization. And since you are a fan, just answer. Michelle and I have a question. Where are the Black people?
Well, that's a good place to begin because I always tell people when I've been asked about, Handmaid's Tale, there's two of them. There's the Hulu production, which frankly, most people have seen more than read the book. I first read, you beat me by about a year. I first read the book in 1986 when it first came out. And Atwood kind of, and there's been and I think rightly so, a lot of attacks about the racism that is implied in the book that she authored. Black folk are in the book are called the children of Ham, I believe, which is based on the Hamitic myth in the book of Genesis. And they have been, the book implies that they've been exiled, but as you keep reading the book, it implies that they've been exterminated. I actually heard a scholar of Atwood back, I don't know, 15 years ago say that they were all exiled to Iowa, but I don't see any of that in the book any place. But there are no black folk in there. And as a scholar, I've always looked at those who author books, make movies, do TV shows, and give this excuse about getting rid of black folk. It's a way that they don't have to deal with it. So the Hulu production, of course, has several black folk in it. There's so-called mixed race children. In fact, Off Red, who is the main, protagonist, her child, she's married to a black man in the book after, she's married to a brother after kind of stealing him away from his black wife. That's a whole nother discussion now. Okay.
Episode number 12.
That's right. And that's when I stopped feeling sorry for it. Not that I ever did, but that's when I really, I said, well, this brother, I didn't have issues with the brother. I had major issues with the brother, but that's a side story. But so the book has these, it's almost like Atwood pimped the history of our enslavement to write her book, because the book is really about enslavement. In this case, the enslavement of white women, in a land that has been, collapsed because of, the government was blown up, literally. The president, the Congress was, blew up or something. And women suffer infertility. I don't know how Atwood wrote the book without including black folk, but she managed to do it. And the racism in the book is not only inherent in how the book was written, but not even paying homage or saying anything except a couple of sentences about what happened to the black people. And also in the book, there ain't no Native people, indigenous people. It's like the only people that exist in the United States, at least, are white folks.
And people who speak English.
And people who speak English, so, I mean, this is a narrow view. And again, the Hulu production tried to expand that. And I think they did a fair job of it, because there are blacks who are major characters in the Hulu production. But overall, I felt that Atwood just pimped enslavement, our enslavement. Didn't pay
global enslavement, because there are particular forms of sexual assault and sexual assignment that come out of other forms of,
But notice, Janice, they don't call it sexual assault. It's like institutionalized rape or ritual, and I forget the name they assign to it, whatever they call it. But it's just, and also notice that the women in the book, similar to the field hands in actual, enslavement, are women. What do they call them?
They're called the unwomen.
The unwomen
in the colonies.
Exactly. And so the major oppressor of women that keep them in line, I forget, in the Hulu tells that mean woman, that she's always hitting people and everything. What
Aunt
do they call
Lydia.
aunts? Aunt Lydia. Aunt Lydia. They are the ones used to keep women under, on the firing line, which is
Absolutely.
very similar to Clarence Thomas right now. And I don't want to say you're a former boss, but so we won't mention your former
We
boss's
can't.
name, okay?
I want to tell people in the audience we can't help it.
Go ahead, go ahead. You say it. You say it.
We can't
Was
help
it
it. We can't help it. Because
a
I,
physician?
in the same sense that you're raising the issue of how women can lead, guide, and be so cruel and throw other women under the
Under the
bus
bus.
for power and authority, and how stupid some women are because they don't recognize how power works.
Right.
So instead of creating an army for themselves for what they need, they push the army of the men like Serena Joy does, gets her finger cut off, gets her ass whipped. But she still didn't figure out that Fred was never going to give her power in Gilead in that system. Um,
Exactly.
and going back to Clarence Thomas, one of the things that was very and looking at it through the lens of white supremacy and racism and what we learned from that growing up in Jim Crow, one of the things that really occurred to me is Clarence Thomas, that these women, some of these handmaids, like Matthew, the one that went berserk and shot up the place
Right.
and ended up getting blown to pieces, and they dragged her out of the grocery store after they killed her, that she was trying to make peace with it all. She was trying to convince June, and June found out that she was a betrayer of the underground. And that's why June was bullying her into doing stupid stuff. But she was willing to go along to get along because she defined that as safety. In the same way that I can't understand how Clarence Thomas, no matter what his political wages are, can live with a white supremacist.
But see,
How do you
that's
do that?
well, you have to be in almost a complete state of denial. But Janet, I'm telling you, a couple of months ago, I actually met a person, a woman. I was at a meeting in New York, uh, and a bunch of black psychologists. Anyway, long story short, she was at the meeting. I had never met her before, and we were just talking, and she said, well, I'm keeping a little bit quiet in this meeting because I used to be married to an Italian. And I said, you mean a white person? She said, no, he wasn't white, he was Italian. I said, that's his nationality. How did he classify himself? Well, he was married. She said he classified himself as white, but I always referred to him as Italian. And then she said that he was a strong supporter of Donald Trump. And so was she. I said, well, Donald Trump is a white supremacist. Or, she said, no, he isn't. Now she's sitting in this meeting with black psychologists, keeping quiet, having been married, because she said she was now divorced, having been married to a white guy that supported Donald Trump. But she denied the fact that she had compromised herself as a black person. This is why Malefius Sante, the father of modern Afrocentricity, says out at Temple University, the further he defines insanity in black people as the further away that you move away from your African self, the crazier you get. And that's what I think Thomas being married to a white supremacist, we could go, have a long list
But
of
but
people.
but you and I both know that Malofe Asante has been saying that for years and years. He said it on my show a number of times when we've talked about these issues. And one of the things that we know. I've been saying about if we know that that is true,
Right.
we get lost. We start wandering around in our abilities to understand what's happening in front of us, which is why I think the story is so important uh, to um, especially in our community and especially in America, to understand white supremacy and why people were willing to attack those people who were organizing for the attack on January 6, 2021. They didn't know that the Capitol Police didn't have machine guns ready for them. They didn't know that. But
Right.
it is so insidious. It's like diabetes. It won't go away. That they were willing to do it because it was their whiteness was so embedded in who they are.
But Janet, let me tell you this. If I called you up on January the 1st of last year and said, Janice, a group of us are going to, a group of black folk are all going to the Capitol. We're going to stop the election. You would have said, Ray, you must be out of your black mind. See, I think white people feel they can do anything. I mean, the last poets, what was their famous one? Um, the white man got a God complex. I think white people felt, look, we can storm the Capitol and we're not going to get killed. We
Mhm.
may be willing to die, but we can do that. Black folk wouldn't even think about doing that. And I know there were a couple of confused black folk in the crowd, but in general, black folks said, storm the Capitol, you must be
You
crazy.
know, lost
We
your
ain't doing
mind.
that. They lost their mind. But see, I think, like you just said, white supremacy is so embedded in people classified as white. It's almost a delusion. You know, it's delusional. Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about the delusional nature of being a racist. Bobby Wright, who I went to school with, talked about the psychopathic racist personality that, you know,
Amos Wilson, you can go along the line. You
Amos
can go
Wilson.
down the line, all the
Exactly.
way to Jeremiah Wright, the
Exactly.
pastor of the former
Trinity.
of
Trinity.
Trinity Church in Chicago. But let me ask you a question. You know, Dr. Naeem Akbar, I started having a girl crush on him when I was like 12.
Okay.
He lived
He
across the
knows
street.
that, I'm sure.
He lived across the street from my grandmother. So, um,
Okay.
but Naeem Akbar and I had a conversation maybe about 6 years ago. And one of the things that he said in the conversation was that we have three generations of Black people, Black kids, children, students who really don't understand what it is to be Black, why their Blackness is important to them. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
going to ask you on this show what we should do about that. We'll ask you on our common ground on a Saturday night
Okay.
what you should do about that. But when I look at this story and I go to the very beginning when the Civil War broke out, there had been a cataclysmic environmental catastrophe. And I'll give it to Margaret Atwood Ray. I will give it to her that
Hmm.
catastrophe, because Black people were and brown people and indigenous people were always subject to environmental injustice, that
Still
many
are.
of them were lost in that event of the story.
That's
I
right.
know y'all looking at me out there and saying, damn, Janice takes this thing real seriously. I do. I really do. And El Michelle Odom, who produced this series, she has looked at the Hulu production like every episode about 3 times. I can't do that. But if you go back to how Gilead was established, there were some variables that we can look at that were in place in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected president. One of them was the um, im- im- explosion of white people who were willing to say that a black man or African American man should not, could not be president of the United States. And it had nothing to do with his African father. It had nothing to do with any of that. It had to do with they perceived him as black.
Right.
Okay. So, do you think were the variables that are real in our society today that allowed these commanders, and essentially a white woman who wrote the book? I mean, Serena Joy wrote the book, which was the blueprint for Gilead,
Right.
for the fascism, the authoritarianism, and there was no autocracy. It was all fascist. It was all authoritarianism. So, what do you think were the variables?
Well, see, you know, I think that Black people underestimated how incredibly angry white people were during the Obama administration. They were furious, and I'm not talking about for when he got elected like the night. I'm talking about for 8 years, and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's ironic. And and Obama, as you know, in my opinion, he wasn't a radical president. It wasn't like they had,
Far from
elected
it.
Malcolm X or something like that. He was a moderate to conservative, but we thought that he had impeccable credentials. Princeton, his wife Harvard. I'm sorry, that's the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Harvard and Princeton, him and his
Columbia.
wife.
Mm-hmm,
Exactly.
mm-hmm.
Uh, Beautiful children, no scandal in 8 years. I mean, none whatsoever. They couldn't find anything on them. So we thought that we had offered the best. And it's almost like white America said, okay, you offered us what you consider your best. We're going to show, we've got to make that office more corrupt than it already historically has been. We're going to give you our worst. I always tell people that Trump was the president that white folks thought Obama was going to be, and he wasn't. And so I think all of the seething hostility, not just from Obama, but throughout the years, this country has always been racist. Elie Mystal, in The Nation or on MSNBC, but he writes for The Nation. He said week after that decision where that judge let that woman cop go, who had killed what's his name up in Minnesota. He said, "This country hates us, and we don't want to accept that." Like, I believe that white people in general do not like black folk. He said, "Well, what about the ones that get married?" I believe that white people don't like black folk. And and I can show that throughout history and black folk.
And Jenny Thomas has proven it.
Right. Jenny Thomas has proven it. Frank Wilderson, who unfortunately is married to a white woman too. I guess I can say all that on this show. I read his book a few weeks ago, Afro Pessimism, a couple years ago, actually. Afro Pessimism, he says no matter what black people do, give them an Obama cure for AIDS, cancer, and COVID in a $5 pill, white people will never see us as human beings. And see, I think that is harder for us to accept than for them to accept. And this is globally. I mean, we see what's going on right now in the Ukraine. Black folk can't even get across the
Out.
border to Poland. All over the world. I've been to Australia, all over Africa. Black folk are hated all over the earth. And as a psychologist, I've got to ask why. And I think, in fact, I know it's because white people feel inferior to us at so many levels. I ain't got time to get into that. And they have spread that disease and that ideology of white supremacy throughout the planet. We got Asian women. What is it? 100,000 Asian women every year get their eyes surgically so that they'll be looking like European. We could talk about skin lighteners among us, hair straighteners. I mean, we could talk about all of this stuff. And I think that white people in this country, the seeds of a Gilead have always been here. And we're seeing it now. Not only we see it in the oppression of Black people with voting rights being suppressed all over the country. And then we go to Texas, we see these, abortion laws, and in Mississippi and places like that are so egregious to women. And at the bottom of that, unfortunately, are African women. So I think the seeds for a Gilead have been here since 1770. Look, before 1619.
Let's talk about reproductive rights from the point of view of this tale.
Yeah.
One of the concerns of the Gilead commanders, or the framework of this society, is that there has to be more births.
Yeah.
Because the white men are all infertile. And they know it, but they're not admitting it. Fred
exactly.
never admitted. And I still want to know how Serena Joy got pregnant. But anyway, that's another story. And when you see the opponents, I mean the vile, rabid opponents of abortion rights, pro-choice in this country, I think the underlying construction of that opposition is fear of annihilation, white annihilation.
It is. You're absolutely correct.
Because otherwise they wouldn't care. They wouldn't care about your a woman parts. They wouldn't.
Right.
And here's another part of that. If you look at American TV, if you listen to American radio, if you read American magazines, you see all of these men. They can get Viagra, they can get
Cialis,
carrot fixed. I actually sat in my patio having a long conversation with a friend, trying to figure out why the ad uses a carrot instead of a cucumber. But anyway, right. So all of this has to do with retaining the white population.
At all costs.
On the African continent, sterilization is totally part of government programs.
That's right.
At the southern border in the United States of America, in order to get on a list, in order to get any help, one of the things that Guatemalan, South American women, Mexican women had to do was to agree to sterilization. In the South, in Jim Crow, Black women were lied to. They were lied to. They were routinely, in secret, without disclosure, being sterilized.
Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yes.
As an example.
Yeah. And I didn't know that fact until maybe about 3 years ago, that she had been sterilized involuntarily.
Well, there's estimates that over 35,000 women were sterilized in this country from roughly, and it's ironic because in my field of psychology, from roughly when the Stanford Binet IQ test was invented by Lou Terman in like 1912, 1910, something, because they used it. Sterilization, I mean, we can see it in Nazi Germany, all over, and it's mostly involving women of color. uh, the North Carolina lawsuits, the California lawsuits uh, involving the sterilization of Black women who did not know they were being sterilized. When I lived in Nashville, Janice, there was this persistent rumor, and we never had the resources to check it out, but that boys in Memphis born after World War II up until 1955 were castrated, when they were born. And
As part of the
that was
circumcision.
right, as part of the circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted to do a study about how many infertile Black men who would now be in their 70s and stuff like that, how many Black men in their 70s who were born in Memphis, Black, were sterile. So we don't even know the extent of sterilization, but it's been a weapon of choice from a people who see their genetic annihilation as being imminent unless they can suppress the Black population, the brown population in this world.
Let's look at another aspect of the tale. One of the things that has, and it's not just in my view, it's well known, that in the post, in the pre, in right after slavery, in the post, why am I saying post construction?
Reconstruction. Okay.
Era, in the Jim Crow era, in the Civil Rights era, that fear and terrorism was used as a weapon for fear
That's
and
right.
powerlessness. And we see the wall. But then when we go to later, the episode, season 4, and we see the civil rights, the Civil War being conducted, and there are resistors. Most of the resistors are people who you would say are outliers and Black people.
Yeah, that's right. When she goes to Alfred gets on the train and goes, hides in the milk, and then goes to Chicago. Yeah.
So, and the people who were most helpful to her were outliers and Black people.
That's right. That's right.
So, what I want to ask you about fear and terrorism, whether or not America chooses to ignore, most people choose, not most people, but people who are conservatives, which is a lot of people, people who are evangelical, right-wing, crazy people, they choose to ignore January 6th as a major indicator of America's crisis in democracy. And we need to talk about democracy too.
Well, one of the parallel between the tale and what's going on in America is that this theocratic society arises that feels that infertility has a little bit to do with the environment, but it's some kind of curse from God, and that's why women are infertile. Well, in this country, I've always been, I always tell people, if this country collapses, it is not going to collapse under a so-called liberal president. It's going to collapse under a very conservative right-wing president. And one of my friends who's very religious, he always said, well, Ray, I think it'll be under somebody that's more liberal like Obama. And he's he voted for him. And so after the Trump era was, I don't know if it's over with, but after Trump, he kind of changed his mind about that. If you ever notice, Janice, and I'm sure you have, there's like this bizarre mixture of patriotism, Christianity, or I call it churchianity, and this love of country, whatever that means. I guess that's supposed to be patriotism. And it gets into this witch's brew of like saying we need to oppress Black people. We need to take away women's right to choose. We need to
Make people
oppose.
poor. Make poor
We need to
people
keep
pay.
people, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that, those who are opposed to abortion, let's focus on that. Those who are opposed to abortion are primarily white people, because they know their numbers are dwindling. I mean, the least likely to have a baby in the United States today are white women. Black, brown folks, I can't quote Richard Pryor, but he said we're having a lot of intercourse. I'll put it that way. We're having the children, and they're worried about not having enough children to populate this country. White women's or white people's life expectancy declined dramatically during the pandemic. But even though we were the ones that were, Black folk are really susceptible to getting COVID and stuff like that. It was people with underlying conditions, and white folks got underlying conditions too. So I think that this kind of draping God over everything to justify, sexism and racism is something that is as American as apple pie. They've been doing it for ever since the founding of this country. In the name of God, we have killed hundreds and thousands of Native people and enslaved us.
But the people who fund and support this new fondness for fascism and authoritarianism, these people are wrapping all of it from the fabric of white supremacy.
They are.
And we've got people running around saying, oh, they're just racist. They're just racist. I think that the ideology, the global, what I would call stone strike of white supremacy is so fundamental to what's happening in this country and so dangerous, and our ignorance and our misunderstanding of what all these things mean, which is why I think this tale is so important, it is dangerous. That we are all in danger, not having an understanding that it's not just race. You better pack your bag. You my grandson, who's 20, has just started watching the Hulu production. And he was saying, why did the people go to Canada? Why didn't they go to the Caribbean? Why didn't they go to the Bahamas or somewhere? Why didn't they go, the other way? Because of the populations in Canada, which means that to a certain extent he gets it. But I'm wondering, and I go back to Dr. Naeem Akbar's statement to me about how important it is that not only our youth, Black youth, brown youth, indigenous youth understand that this is global, that it is endemic in this country, but that white people understand that as well.
They do. And that is such an important point you just raised, because I forget the author, but just a few weeks ago, someone said the only thing that white people immediately unite on is being racist. So we see right now, in the middle of a war in the Ukraine, if I was in Ukraine now, I said, we got to get out of here. But wait, there's a black man that wants to get on the train with his family. We got to be racist right now. And they unite against. I actually heard a reporter say, how did he put it? He said, the top level authorities have condemned not letting African people and African Ukrainians get on the train, but that hasn't trickled down to the conductors yet. I said, why does it have to trickle down? They're not trickling down. White people can't get on the train or whatever. Why are white people united even in the midst of a hellish war against black people? Because white people feel that if they get on the train first, they're taking something from us. And historically, white people always feel that black gains, black achievements, whatever you want to go, that somehow they are taking away from us. And because that is their insecurity. I have always said that the most insecure people on this earth as a group are white people. And people know that's a general say. I know some insecure black people. I'm talking about collectively, folks. They are the most insecure people on earth. And when white people get insecure, they get violent. When we get insecure, we'll start saying, well, I'm going to eat another piece of chocolate cake, or I'm going to go swimming, or something like that. When white people get insecure, they're going to shoot somebody. Yeah. And they're very insecure.
Yeah, but one of the things that about whiteness, in my observation, is that it is so forever.
It is.
You know, if you are white, you are forever. But if I marry a white husband, my child is not black forever.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And so I'm trying to understand where this unsureness comes from.
Well, see, I think, look,
I think it's embedded in class.
I think it's embedded deeply. Look, if you and I'm going to just say this, if you and I had sex with you with any man on earth and me with any woman on earth, I can blindfold myself and I know that child's going to be black. Okay? But like Chuck D of Public Enemy said on that incredible album, Fear of a Black Planet, he has that rap where he said, black man, black woman, black child. Black man, white woman, black child. Black woman, white male, black child. Then he starts talking about white man, and he goes through all of them. The only way a white person can produce a white child is to have sex with a white person. We can produce black children, whoever we have sex with. Mm-hmm. So again, and then these things, again, as a psychologist, how white men among themselves will say, you aren't a real man until you've had sex with a black woman. Mm-hmm. And in fact,
a lot of white people don't know that was said, but I'm here
Spike
to
Lee
underscore.
Spike Lee underlined it in the movie, Do the Right Thing. He said that. And now I have never heard a black man say, you're not a man until you've had sex with a white woman. Why did they cut off our testicles, and castrate us when we were lynched and pass them out? And that's what Welsing does, that a lot of people don't like it, but it's in her book and she's written about it, and I agree with it. There is a lot of sexual anxiety among white people about black people as well. And that sexual anxiety has taken the form of violence. When I'm telling you, when white people get, remember when Richard Pryor on that album, I forget what album, he said he always runs when he hear a group of white people saying Yahoo. And because they ready to kill somebody. They do it in groups.
And one of the things that we should point out, and we see it budding up in this story.
Yes.
That it is these kinds of particulars are specific to the U.S.
It is. It is. It's not that racism doesn't exist around the planet, because it certainly does. But, you know, in my city of Baltimore, we did some research. In 1919, Baltimore was the first city that officially in the United States segregated neighborhoods by blocks. Officially, it's codified in the law. Guess who came over here to find out how they did it? The budding Afrikaners of South Africa. So Baltimore is responsible for the housing of Soweto and all of this stuff. And I'm writing something about that right now. So like you said, in the United States, this idea of Hitler did the same thing.
Yes,
the Germans were right. In Namibia, a lot of those Germans that were in Namibia took their ways of doing racism and segregation and apartheid from the United States. So, you know, so the United States, I don't want to say it's unique in its racism, but it's unique in how it codifies racism to embed it deeply in the minds of white people, which is spread again as a disease around the planet.
And I think people need to be reminded that chattel slavery, you know, people run around saying, oh, there was slavery in every society in history, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But chattel slavery was the most horrific form of slavery in world history.
That's right.
Which means it was different. And I think people, you know, I think, you know, I've always thought that information gives people the choice to have power.
Yes.
And so, which is why I would suggest to everybody who's watching this this discussion tonight to check out Dr. Raymond Winbush's book, all of his books, but Should America Fail? Belinda's Petition.
Should America Pay?
Should America Pay? I'm sorry. Should America Pay?
But I agree
got it right here. I got it right here. Should America Pay?
Okay.
Let me grab it. Here you go. Where's the camera?
That's it.
Slavery and the Raging Reparations. Ray, I have to tell you, I go back to this book every time I read another book about chattel slavery, because reparations and chattel slavery. Every time I read something that's written where Black people are arguing about reparations, I go back to your book. But people need to understand that all of what's happening in this country, this crisis in democracy, and Black people have been living in a crisis of democracy. I have been living in a crisis of democracy all of my life.
That's right.
You have been living in a crisis, and it's really funny to hear you say, and I know how long you've been living in Baltimore now, but you will always be Dr. Winbush in Nashville. But but I think that one of the things that people who want to really understand this crisis that we are in have to understand that, number one, it was articulated by Donald Trump. It was not created by Donald Trump.
There you go. There you go.
And because of the prophetic nature, and Jared Yates Sexton was on this series in episode 1. And one of the things that he said is that if you look at the United States today and the circumstances under which the threats are happening, then you would say that Margaret Atwood's tale is a bit quaint.
I agree.
Um, and that people begin to really claim and understand the nature when when there is discussion about a coming race war. I have been on guard for the last year and a half about this. All the discussions, I got it on Google notification and all kinds of notifications about race war. And just 2 weeks ago, there were some very credible journalists who
That's
are
right.
saying that the worst is yet to come.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And it is very, very troubling. And one of the things that I thought about, and we're going to take a break and take a look at the whole idea of the tale as a feminist tale, but the whole idea that perhaps this strategy in the Ukraine by the president of Russia is to distract us and to marginalize our military capacity in this country for that race war.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
I'm always reaching.
No, that's not a reach, because as you and I have discussed before, Carl Rowan, the great black journalist, before he died, his last book was entitled "The Coming Race War in America,"
Mm-hmm.
and now you hear about it. Dylan Roof back in 2015, when he killed those brothers and sisters in the church in South Carolina. You hear these two white boys in Ohio, said they were going to destroy the grid last week to create chaos and hopefully a race war.
Mm-hmm.
White people are planning for that. And you said, well, is it all white people? No. But you don't need all white people to do anything. If you have a significant number, it'll happen. And this is why I always said that with Atwood's book, there were 3 stages to Gilead. The first was the precursor stage, when the disaster happened and women became infertile and all of that. Then it was the implementation phase, and finally it was just keeping it going. Well, see, I think right now we're in the precursor stage of a Gilead right now with this issue of race. Black people are blamed for so many things, happening, and so I could easily see a governor arising saying things like, just like women can't have abortion, black people need to be isolated. Trump actually said it during his presidency about the homicides that were occurring in Chicago. He said, I'll send in the National Guard. So this is on the mind. How can we annihilate black people? And so I think, I told you once, and I'll say it on this show, over the past year and a half, I'd never owned a gun, but I now have 7. And I can tell you what each one of them is for. And I'm taking lessons. They're all legal, legitimate, and so forth. But I'm concerned about that. The biggest purchasers of guns right now, as you know, Janice, are black women, because they feel much more vulnerable than black men. And brothers in Baltimore and Chicago and Atlanta, we need to quit pointing the guns at each other. And I don't know why George Zimmerman is still alive, but I don't want to, I better not say it. I don't go all out on Twitter when I say that. But go ahead.
Well, what I think we have to, I loved Dr. Frances Cress Welsing from the moment in the early 80s when I read her The ISIS Papers. It was like a light went off in my head, and I thought to myself, I'm not totally crazy. Not
That's right.
totally crazy. And she was a guest many times on Our Common Ground, and I just luxuriated in having conversation with her. A great loss to our community. But,
Absolutely.
and one of the things that I want to say is that white supremacy, in the context of what happens in the Republic of Gilead, in the development of the Republic of Gilead Liberation Army, um, we can't have a repeat of what happened to the Black Liberation Army when
That's
we
right.
are trying to put together a resistance campaign, a resistance movement against the coming, or I even say, I mean, I live in Florida. And in South Florida, you can go to on any weekend, on any major roadway, and find the Trump people, the Make America Great people, the neo-Nazi people having rallies on
That's
state
right.
property along the roadway. Um, during the Trump campaign, I was still in Massachusetts after for ending my 53 years living in Massachusetts, and I didn't have a sense of fear. Here, I don't leave home without it.
I got you. And see, your governor, and I'm not just saying this DeSantis, but the Florida governor is everybody right now is trying to out Trump. Um, and that's in Texas with the governor there, in Georgia where two of my three children live, definitely in Florida, and I think, and I'm just telling you this, Janice, and you and I have talked about this too. People classified as white are capable of anything. Francis used to tell us, we need to look at, and it's good that we have African studies, Egyptology or so-called Egyptology. It's good that we have that, but we need to study the mentality of a people who could enslave, rape, castrate, sell, buy a group of people for over 300 years in this country. Their mentality of doing that. We need to look at Derek Chauvin, the dude that killed George Floyd. How can a person kneel hearing a man die for over 9 minutes and not have any compassion for him? That's a mentality. And
Or
I
if
say,
we look at our prison system, that let's
look at
not
the prison
forget
system.
about the prisons. I love to watch Turkish TV, um,
Okay,
other kinds of other than American TV, and I want to ask you
right.
about when you can call your friend um, um, Lee, Mr. Lee, and ask him to do this Handmaid's Tale kind of show and embellish the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Right.
But we can't forget, and when you look at prison systems in other countries that are wholly more humane than ours,
Oh yeah.
Like today, I was writing a policy for a politician. And one of the things that I said is that there should be a law in one of this policy talking about incarceration and prison systems that if a company hires a prisoner and pays them, they have to pay wages which is same or similar to the entry level pay that they would pay somebody sitting in their manufacturing or operations. And then if that prisoner who is an employee is released, they should be required to give them a full-time job.
Good luck with that, Janice. I mean,
I
I agree
know,
with
I
you,
know. You know how many,
but
how many legislative proposals I've written in my life, and most, and 99% of them have gone nowhere. But that's
we're
what.
now we're trying in Baltimore. They used to have that colleges and universities could teach and give degrees within the prison system. Then we got a
Mhm,
fascist governor who took that because that was a privilege. So we're
mhm,
trying to restore that now. There's a move to restore that so that professors can teach in a prison, give people or prisoners can earn a degree and graduate within prison.
mhm,
So I mean, the American punishment system, I mean, it's comparable to, like you said, to the prison in places like Colombia, Mexico, and all of it.
mhm,
Look at Finland's prison system, probably one of the best in the world. So it doesn't mean that you don't. I mean, I know Angela Davis, she said we should get rid of prisons. You can't reform them. And, hopefully we won't move to a system like the way they have the colonies or had the
mhm,
colonies in
mhm,
The Handmaid's
mhm,
Tale, or
mhm.
just
But in The
simply
Handmaid's
people from
Tale,
the
when people went to the colonies, they knew that they were going
they,
to die.
they did.
It was a
And that
place for genocide.
exactly. And that's what our prisons are today. They
Mhm,
are.
mhm,
And
mhm,
unjust incarceration, these so many people are getting hanged in prisons or hanging themselves in prison. And there's murder in prison. We know what's going on in Rikers Island. Have known what's going on in Rikers Island for years, and we do nothing about it.
mhm, mhm.
So
Let's talk about how white supremacy hides itself in forms of hypocrisy. In the Republic of Gilead, many of our guests, Dr. Karen Ritzenhoff, Dr. Um, Ruth Ben Gyat, Jared Yates Sexton, Dr. James McIntosh. You know James McIntosh, right?
sure.
Um, all of them have talked about the level of hypocrisy, the same kind of hypocrisy that we see members of our Congress, members of our state and local legislators. Uh, for instance, the brothel, where
Yeah,
the Jezebels, a
that's right.
class of women who were sterilized so they wouldn't get pregnant because that's where the commanders went to get pleasure.
That's right.
Uh, Karma Walton and Dr. Karma Walton and talked a lot about that last week on this forum. Um, and the idea that we don't take seriously is sexual abuse of men. Nick, for instance, he was
That's right.
ordered to sleep with June.
With true. Exactly. Exactly.
And while Commander Fred and all the other commanders were at the brothel, the Nick's wife, who he was forced to marry, he couldn't refuse, which is, uh, to my notion, not consent. Um, his wife committed adultery with another of the soldiers, and that was the most brutal scene I had ever seen in television. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
So the hypocrisy that on one hand, you're talking about your alliances with organizations of family value, your leadership on family value legislation, but you support, endorse, and have normalized white supremacy and racism.
Well, hypocrisy, is characteristics of the United States forever. I mean, let's start with the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States. Uh, you know, all men, not women, not black folk, not native people, are created equal. Um, I visited last week the American Museum of the Museum of the American Indian in D.C. I'd never been there, and I was shocked. They had this entire room named with the brand names of products that were named after Native people. Calumet baking soda, uh, the former Washington, quote, Redskins, Kansas City Chiefs. Oh, and they went on, and there were hundreds of them. But at the same time, at the end of the exhibit, they showed Andrew Jackson saying, "We got to kill these people." Thomas Jefferson said, "No Indian should live east of the Mississippi. They should all live west of the Mississippi. And if they aren't, we need to get rid of them, exterminate them." He used that term. So this country is full of hypocrisy. That's why black folk like, Colin Kaepernick didn't sing, and I have never sang since I was, I think, 14 years old, the Star Spangled Banner. It's full of hypocrisy. Black people point it out. White people rarely do, because the white supremacy glues them together. And so I think, like in Gilead, where sexuality is suppressed or brutal, this country does the exact same thing in a variety of ways. So I think hypocrisy is just a part of the United States. And the person who I think expressed it the best, again, is Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech. He said, "Go anywhere in the world and you won't find a country as hypocritical as this." And I agree with him.
Well, I certainly, having had traveled on 8 continents, um, have not. Uh, but I think that one of the ways, it goes back to something that one of my guests on Our Common Ground says all the time, is that for whatever reason, it has been Black, brown, indigenous resistors who have been the moral barometer for this country.
And still are. And still
Mm-hmm.
are. It's never been white people. I mean, it's never been. You can name Rosa Parks, King, Malcolm, who always pointed out the hypocrisy. And as you just said, the moral, center of this country has always been black folk. And they'll say things like "Give me liberty" or "Give me death" or "Lincoln freed the slaves," another lie or something like that. But they will, the group of people, I don't care if it's Geronimo, Sitting Bull, I can think of, what's his name? Oh my goodness, I'm blocking his name. But brown people, Cesar Chavez. It's always been people of color who have been that keeps this country on a moral course, if you want to call it that, or at least points out the hypocrisy of it all.
Well, I think for those who are listening and who will view this discussion, that one of the things that if you are white, you have to be able to identify the extent to which you are somehow honoring or embedded in your whiteness.
Oh, I agree too. I mean, Janice, like, look, like, I'm not trying to take, but see, this is why I had problems. Another problem with The Handmaid's Tale. When Breonna Taylor was killed, you did not see, at least I didn't see, and may have been white feminist groups talking about the murder of a woman, not a black
Mm-hmm.
woman. But then you see when white women, like the brother that accidentally shot the white woman, the cop up in Minnesota, you saw feminist groups rise up. So even,
Mm-hmm.
among white feminists, which I guess Atwood's tale is supposed to be that, you see hypocrisy. I had problems years ago, and you remember when uh, Gloria Steinem put uh, Michelle, what's her name that wrote Black Macho,
Wallace,
when put her on
Michelle
the cover of
Wallace.
Michelle Wallace, and put her on the cover of Ms. Magazine, said she was the most important woman of the 20th century. Uh, more important than Fannie Lou Hamer, more important than Rosa Parks, Ida B. Wells. That was hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it runs through the feminist liberal movement. It runs through and see, that's why I don't want to criticize the brother, but I ain't gonna what's your brother up in Boston, what's his name up there, Kendi?
Yep. You Skip Gates.
I ain't gonna say nothing, I'm gonna leave that alone.
I never had a girl crush on him. So don't let him tell you that is so.
Right. Well, it's some issues. So, but I think when you write a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, that's your other boy up in Boston.
Yeah,
Now,
he's at Boston University. I can't think of his name now. He's too young to
Kendi
use.
something,
Stuff.
and I
Yeah.
mean, you know, and that's why if you remember, they move. Ta-Nehisi's book is more pessimistic, you know, than Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I think you can be, as Welsing says, a counter-racist, but like Derek Bell said, black people are never going to gain equality in this country. And, people call the critical race theorists, I ain't talking about this crap that they're saying it, but they're saying, well, the critical race theorists are very pessimistic. They're realistic. I don't think there's ever going to be a time in this country that, Janice, they said, well, remember when we had racism back in 2020? It
No,
ain't
I
going
don't.
to happen.
I don't. Yeah, it's not going to happen. You know, it's almost like a long time ago, when we were growing up as activists. I remember. I I I don't know if it was Ron Walters or if it was some other man that looked like Ron Walters at the Gary convention.
Yeah.
And he kept referring, and I was young. I wasn't even 19 years old yet. And he kept referring to our stain. And every time he said that, my skin would prickle.
Our
Like
stain.
that black people had been stained. And he was and I'm going, well, I'm not sitting well with this. But what do I know? I'm not 19 years old yet. So, uh, uh, but I do think now, I think back to that. And he was an older man. He taught at Howard or somewhere. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe that's what he was talking about, that we would never be able to move away from the status that has been assigned us in this country.
Well, he could have been, but, you know, he should have known better if he was a professor.
I know.
As a black professor. But see, the other thing, like what Derek Bell said, we must see this not as an act of submission, but for the ultimate defiance. Yeah. And he gives this, I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to see us being equal, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what that means, but I believe that we have to fight with everything that we have in our bodies.
Mm-hmm. And we have to understand. Racism. We have to understand it in the context in which we have to live. Like after the Vietnam War, all the vets that I knew, they were saying, yeah, I'm not protesting. Most of the vets that I knew said, I'm not protesting the war. I take what I can use and leave the rest. Right. And I think that we do have to figure out how to thrive and teach our children behaviors which help them to navigate successfully.
That's counter-racism strategy. Right.
Yes. But we cannot be in denial, and we cannot take on, that's like, I got 12 children and my neighbor is asking me if I can keep her 4 children for the weekend. Hey, we can't take on more than we already have.
Exactly.
And as I see you, I see myself, we are the last generation of Black people who lived in Jim Crow. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a show about this on Saturday night. We are the last generation of Black people who lived in Jim Crow at some point in our lives.
That's
and
right.
I'm talking about the Jim Crow. Most people think Jim Crow was only below the Mason-Dixon line. No. Jim Crow was everywhere.
I experienced it in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah. Ask the people in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
That's right.
Ask the people in the Boston, in the Boston, Dorchester, I don't know what they call it. It was an incident that killed 16 Black people. But so we cannot take on more than will heal us and help us. Let's take a look at what young Black women, how they are seeing this, I call it the looking glass.
Okay.
People, particularly Black women, have a problem with the fact that this show is so white. It is a very white show, but I'm gonna be honest, I don't really care. Now, I had a little tinge of guilt season 1 because there are lots of parallels to the plight of enslaved women. I got over it because I just think the show is good, and I also think it's doing something different. Now, people of color, Black people do come in and out of the show. June/Offred's husband is Black, her best friend is Black. There are some really actually impactful cameos by actors of color and Black folks throughout season 1 and season 2. But yeah, this is a very white show. It's based, this gorgeous show was saying so much about our contemporary political climate. But back to the racial aspect of this show, there is a lot of emphasis on like, oh my God, what if we treated women as servants and breeders? Like, what would that look like? And as a Black woman, you gotta be like, I think we know, we know. And Atwood has been really open about the fact that a lot of the horrors that we see depicted in the show are gleaned from real life stuff that happens across the globe. So with regard to what they were trying to tell us, this is where the social commentary became so pointed and poignant. She messed up when she thought that she would be able to advocate for returning women back to the home and then have a seat at the table with the other men who become commanders of Gilead and have her voice be respected on an equal plane.
For domestic feminism, as it was called. Thank you. That's very kind.
I heard you speak once at a rally. Before the war, you were very passionate.
Women 8% in 3 years?
A society in which women can no longer read your book.
That's not how it works. And because just as power seeks more power, freedom seeks more freedom. And that's why when Fred Waterford comes back, his top priority is restoring order. And chastisement isn't enough. Serena Joy has to be broken. Something I really appreciate about the racial politics of this show is, yeah, it is a white show. But I like to see visualized white women being cruel to other white women. It really demonstrates for us how quickly and willingly white women will throw other white women away to maintain their social status. Ain't no racial solidarity here. Now, after all of that, I saw exactly where the writers were going and I was all in. Serena Joy is suffering in a hell of her own making. If your political education is not right, then you think that all feminism is about is women being wild and crazy and being naked if we want and going to work if we want. It's all about me, me, me. What do I want to do? But an equally important part of feminism is the work of world building. What type of world do you want to leave to the generations that come next? After you do the work of imagining, then you have to do the work of building. How are we going to get there? Now, based on her reaction to being dragged away, it feels like she thought she was gonna get out of that punishment somehow, like Fred was gonna come in and save her. Nope, that didn't happen. And that was a great allegory for where we are in this political moment with some of those domestic feminists. Hell, some of the intersectional feminists. We think that that boomerang is not gonna come right back around for us. And if you think that you're gonna be able to sit on the sidelines and watch other people be maimed and demeaned and raped and killed while you get away scot-free, you're wrong. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Now, Ray, that's not how any of this works. No matter. I love that was a clip excerpt from For Harriet, the blogger on YouTube.
Well, if she thought that Hulu's Handmaid's Tale was white, see, the thing that I worry about is that most people haven't read the book. That's a very white book. I had problems. I liked the book, but I hated the book, and I've read books like that before. What I liked about it was a well-told tale, but what I hated about it was the complete erasure of Black folk from it. And again, I guess, I ask my students, well, Dr. Winbush, I haven't read Color Purple, but I saw the movie, or same with Beloved. I could name movie after movie. And I'm, hopefully she'll read the book. I don't think she has read it, though.
No, she hasn't read the book. She admits she did not read the book. One of the things that occurred to me, and I don't know how you responded, but when I read the book, I was stunned as to what happened to Offred. And I'm not going to give it away because people in the audience who don't read the book.
Right.
But I had the same reaction in Beloved. I kind of like it. I'm not going to give that away either. I kind of went, wait a minute. What I think happened, did that happen? I don't think that happened. Oh, no, that could not happen.
But that was a true story, though.
Yes.
Margaret,
yes.
That was a true story. Margaret Garner, that actually, in fact, Toni got her inspiration for Beloved from reading the story of Margaret, so Garner. And I'm from Ohio, and and that story resonated a lot because it occurred in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
She added to it, but I won't tell people if they haven't read Beloved what happens either.
for those of you who are listening and you have not read it, we're talking about Beloved by Toni Morrison, which is now banned and burned in many states
Many.
in this country. You know, and Atwood's book, Banned and Burned. And if we, Ray, the idea, we've only got like 10 more minutes in this broadcast, but if we want to identify the touchstone of 2022's crisis in democracy, it has to be the banning and burning of books.
Oh yeah, that's the. I think the control of women's bodies, in fact, the control of all bodies, and then the burning of books. That's what what's his name? What's the science fiction writer? Fahrenheit 451. Talked about. Hitler did it, and I've been encouraging everybody to read
Octavia Butler talked about burning and banning books.
That's right.
There were a number of her stories where they were secretly hiding the books.
That's right.
And the music.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I think that, I'm worried that as a scholar, 1619 project is, I bought 4 of the books hardback. And I gave them to people I thought that could be thought, leaders and stuff. But that book is being banned. My hardback of my first book, Warrior Method, was banned in several states. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was banned in several states. I know it was banned in Arizona because I had a couple of, I guess, 12-letter words in it, which was a real thing, and it was a nonfiction book. So I think that you got, I think right now that the tipping point in 2022, Janice, is going to be the election in November, because I do believe, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic,
midterms.
The midterm. I think that the Dems are going to lose the House and the Senate. I was concerned, at the State of the Union last week that the idea of voting rights was just given 1 or 2 sentences. Yeah. And I think that, Black folk, particularly in the southern United States and in other countries, states as well, are going to be shut out of voting. And I think that's going to be the beginning of Gilead.
Yeah, the combination of voter suppression, access, change in voter schedules and process, redistricting. I think you're right, and it's very scary. Last year this time I was saying if the Democrats lose the House and the Senate, I was going to be looking for another place to live. Be an expatriate.
You and me both.
Yeah, I mean, that's how scary. That is why people need to be able to go through every inch of this book and identify white racism, white nationalism, and understand it so particularly because it's coming your way. And if you didn't see it in the story, then you miss a lesson that you need to learn about where we are in this country. I am old enough to remember, and you are too, Ray, when democracy was a third. Now it's like a half for Black people. So,
well, see, I've always been very. Somebody asked me on an interview a couple of weeks ago. They said, "When did you lose faith in America?" And to be very honest, it was the night that Dr. King was shot. I gave up on the country. So what is that, 50, 60 something year, almost 60 years ago. I just gave up. I said, they killed King, and I'm not saying it didn't happen because Malcolm's assassination occurred earlier. I was willing to get a benefit of the doubt. I have not given America the benefit of the doubt since April 4th, 1968. I was 20 years old. And so I don't see anything changing. In fact, if you had told me in 68 we would elect somebody like Trump, I would have probably said, yeah, that's possible. But to actually see it being carried out is something else. I think right now that I never thought we would see the suppression of the Voting Rights Act. It's evisceration. And we've seen that. And we've seen more laws passed in the past year and a half since 1965, to suppress the vote. So I'm prepared for the race war. And I think I've been encouraging other people to get prepared for it. And there's a variety of things. The first thing we got to do is understand what white supremacy is, like Neely Fuller said. And many of us do not understand what white supremacy is, what it does, and what we should do about it. And that's why we're confused.
And we do note, I met Neely Fuller, Mr. Fuller, at a whiteness conference. Y'all laugh because I was going to the whiteness conference. Remember, I was going to the whiteness conference over at Harvard?
I remember
I
that.
was going to the whiteness conference, and that's where I was able to spend a whole day and an evening with Neely Fuller. And for those of you who are not familiar with Neely Fuller, you need to Google it, and you need to understand that everything, if you do not understand, Neely Fuller's quote is this: if you do not understand white supremacy and how it works, then everything else that you know will only serve to confuse you.
That's right.
Dr. Raymond Winbush, it's been wonderful having this. This is not my genre, but I'm
That's all
trying.
right. We'll do it again.
Okay. And I think we need to talk about this outside the context of the book that does not point to it, but shows it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I've been saying. The book does not point to it, but shows it.
That's right.
And thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I am still very thankful for all the hard work that El Michelle Odom did to get people like Dr. Ruth Ben Ghiat and Dr. Karen Ritzenhoff and Jarrett Yates Sexton. We have Dr. James McIntosh. We have had the best minds on this thing. Because if America fails, there is a coming tyranny. Thank you, Dr. Ray Winbush, and we will see you at another time. And for all of you, do join us next week when Dr. Cynthia Ann Barron will be our guest, and we're going to be talking about the players, America Under Siege, the players, and the game. I'm Janice Graham, and we are TruthWorks Network. If America fails, tell your friends. Don't forget to subscribe down below. You got to do that thing down below. Follow us on Twitter at TWN Talk. And I also would like to invite you to join me on Saturday night at Our Common Ground with Janice Graham, and we'll be in conversation with the Our Common Ground witness from the bridge, Dr. Ruby Nell Sales. Thank you so much. See you next week with Dr. Cynthia Ann Barron, the players and the game. Hi. I hit the button.
seriously what the actual